Evening, everyone. Welcome to this final terminal meeting of the Environment ONS. I hope it's a very pleasant one. First of all, we'll go straight to the agenda. The apologies for absence, please, Kim.
Thank you, Chairman. We have apologies for absence from councillors Martin Darcy, Paul Rivers, Brian Edmonds and Maxine Gale. And we have Councillor Joan Hegan here as a substitute and potentially Councillor Hyman, but he's not arrived yet.
That's great. Thank you very much for substituting. And of course, because of the change of date, some people have made holiday arrangements, you know, so that's really why Martin Darcy isn't here, because he's usually very supportive. But as I say, with the change of date, one or two people are not available, including some of the officers. So we'll see how we get on. Any declarations of interest before the meeting, Kim?
None submitted prior to the meeting, Chairman.
Does anybody have any interest or any item on the agenda? Any questions by members of the public, Kim?
None submitted, Chairman.
Any questions from members?
No, Chairman.
Right, which brings us to item 5, the committee forward work programme. This is going to be interesting. Louise, you want to update us first of all?
Very briefly, Chairman, thank you. So the committee work programme, as you see on your agenda, section A is the tracker, which is on page 10, and on page 13 you have the items that are coming tonight and are proposed for the future meetings. But as we know, we are transitioning into sort of 2 meetings in future, starting potentially in. I'm sorry, Councillor Ailes, can you hear me now? Sorry, I was not quite over the top of it. I beg your pardon. So on page 13 is the items that are coming tonight and in the future. And as you are aware, we will be transitioning into 2 committees, potentially from November. The only item I'd like to draw to your attention, which is down for this evening's meeting, is the local planning enforcement plan. Mr. Elwood has deferred this item from tonight because under the business transformation programme, which you're aware is our series of projects looking at savings and efficiencies across the organisation. They have a project which is looking at enforcement and inspection across the council. So obviously bringing in things like environmental health and other areas of enforcement and inspection. So he felt that to bring a specific planning enforcement plan might be overtaken by events. So we'll wait the outcome of that project and then bring it back to the committee. Other than that, I don't have any comments, Chairman.
Thanks, Louise. Much postponed, but it'll be nice eventually to read something. I wasn't going to say anything on this item, but everyone is free to comment on anything at all they wish to. But, you know, there doesn't seem a great deal of point of wasting much time, unless you want to just have a quick look back at what we've done and see that, you know, we have commented on and put information in on several of the items, but you know, if nobody has any further comment on that, I think we can move straight on. Is that agreed? Everyone okay with that? Don't waste time on things, which moves us straight on to item 6, the corporate performance report. And Nora, you're going to start on this, I hope.
Thank you very much, Chair. So the report that is in front of you members covers the period of the first quarter, which is April, May and June 2021. It is an operational report, so the information that you see in the report covers all different service areas. However, this committee specifically is asked to look at the service areas of environmental services and planning and economic development, which can be found on the pages 53 and also for environmental services, and for planning, it will be page 58 of the agenda. I believe I was expecting colleagues from the environmental services to be here to present the dashboard for that section, but I'm happy to just quickly go over the highlights and take any questions away that the members might have.
Yes,
if that's okay.
Yes, thank you. Now, as I say, with the change of date, we lost 2 of the key officers who would normally present this to us. So I'd be delighted if you could present this for the environmental report. Thank you.
So if we start on page 53 of the agenda, the kind of key points of interest for the members is that it was again a busy quarter. We are still facing the post-COVID recovery in our services. in our kind of day-to-day actions, and our contractors who are providing our services for waste and recycling also kind of experience some kind of issues with COVID-related illnesses, which impacted on the staffing, and agency staff were brought in to maintain the correct levels of refuse recycling and food waste as well. And there was actually quite a minimal disruption to the services, which we are quite pleased with. The car parking income report has been brought to the committee, I believe, last week, so I won't touch on upon this one. There's a couple of 2 significant licensing policies reviews being undertaken, the gambling policy review and the sex establishment review as well, and the public consultations are currently being carried out, and the results, I think we were expecting to bring some feedback to the committees for the November, or actually I think there will be feedback for the November owners cycle, whichever form the committees will exist in at the time. If we move on to the key performance indicators themselves, to the page 54 and 55 of the agenda pack, we still struggle with receiving some of the data. There's some delay with us receiving the data from the waste recycling center. So that is kind of visible quite in our statistics. The material reject rates are quite low. Although our bins are above the target, bin collections are above the target. They're actually not that far off. So we're quite happy with those figures as well. With street cleaning as well, the impact again of COVID has been quite significant. So there were some small delays in getting all those inspections done. Moving on to service plans. At this time of the year, we are just starting on our actions. So there's a couple of kind of exceptions that we've brought in front of you members on page 56, which concern one completed action. And this is the introduction of the public space protection order in respect of antisocial behavior, which was adopted by the council, approved by the council on the 20th of April. And there's one delayed action, and the new proposed date was set for the 31st of October. And that relates to us reviewing our business continuity plans, which will be a little bit delayed just because the COVID is still taking place. So we just want to take a little bit more time to collect all the data necessary for us to assess those plans. With regards to complaints, all of the complaints were responded to within the target timescales, and the current budget position is favorable for the service. There's nothing more from me. I'm happy, as I said, to take any questions back to the services in the absence of the officers present.
That's great. Thank you, Nora. What was a bit worrying is that both of the reports started with "it's been another challenging quarter," both the planning and the environment. Does anybody wish to speak that? Councillor Reid.
I'd just like to ask the officer, could I please ask you to reiterate the comment you made about Surrey with waste? Because I thought that Surrey were doing the main hub of waste, you know, the recycling centres.
I believe, from my understanding, is that they are also, they provide us the statistics on the tonnage as well and the collection, so we don't have that data. That's
Councillor James.
Thank you, Chairman. It's not a question, but I want to say that the few complaints that we've had on this, on 8.5 and stuff, I think is absolutely brilliant under the circumstances. And I think it's because during lockdown, everybody is suddenly aware of actually how much the council officers do and the contractors, that they are embarrassed. They would be embarrassed to now say, oh, my bin hasn't been collected. The things that they said before, people are now aware of the difficulties, and I have not had one complaint about the bins. If they've been missed, everybody just leaves it outside and waits for it to be collected, and they're very grateful when it actually comes along, perhaps just 24 hours late. So I think that the officers and the contractors have done an amazing job.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think I'd agree with you there. I've got Councillor Reid just before Councillor Hyman.
Thank you. I'd like to reiterate what Councillor James has said, but I think as well, it's everyone communicating. You know, we have a wonderful person now as I think he was a chief executive, and he's communicating with every councillor so that we're armed, ready for complaints, but we don't have that many. I had one which was about the waste being discharged from a vehicle that goes up to the top of our lane, which is not a metalled road, but that was quickly and easily dealt with. So it's thanks to all the officers and particularly Nick Baker. Thank you.
No, I do agree with you, Councillor Reid, and it is extraordinary, isn't it, when you've got the information and you can communicate with residents, you know, you head any real problem off at the first conversation. So, you know, it really is a lesson for all services, isn't it? Get the communication, communicate with the councillors, and then they can communicate directly with the residents. Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, I wouldn't want there to be any complacency in respect of getting our services back to normal. Certainly, Chairman, people are very understanding because COVID has been an excuse and a reason for an awful lot of things. But obviously, we've now got the repercussions of that, which are with the HGV drivers affecting our bin deliveries right across absolutely virtually every area of our lives. The HGV driver shortage is going to have impact. So I was wondering whether where we're talking about in the middle of page 55, it says street cleaning performance has been affected, had an effect on crew numbers, but the contractor's making efforts to recover the normally high standards of street cleanliness. We've got in a month to 2 months time, we would hopefully be expecting to have bin drivers driving HGVs around, picking up all the leaves, collecting all the leaves from the streets around our fortunately very wooded borough. Is it going to happen? I suppose is the question. I mean, are we foreseeing a problem with that? I don't know whether we've got an officer here who can give us any sort of answer on that. Perhaps not. It may be that we should put our questions through to Mr. Homewood separately. But the other thing I was concerned about, it says in the middle of page 53, just below halfway down, that additional funding has been provided to recruit additional staff to support the increased workload, and that's talking about the environmental health and licensing teams. It says, but recruitment's problematic as almost all local authorities are trying to recruit at the same time. As the COVID restrictions no longer apply, is that paragraph no longer applicable as far as we're concerned? Have we reduced staff accordingly as if we did increase staff? So it was just what's the situation on that? I do appreciate that this second quarter finishes in a day or two's time. So we're only looking at the first quarter and we're sort of like almost 3 months behind with the information that we've got here. That's not the fault of the staff. They can't do a second quarter report before it's finished, before the quarter's actually finished. But nevertheless, you know, we're a little bit behind on that. So just a couple of things there and are there contractual implications in respect of the excessive tonnages of dry mixed recycling and normal waste? Because obviously if we're having if we've got the amounts that they're collecting up at 11% or more, it says here on page 55, what do we have arrangements within our contract with our with BIFA or that takes care of that? Is there going to be a problem we ought to get on top of? Thanks.
Thank you. I take it nobody can really answer any of those, but Louise has been writing everything down and will presumably give us a written update or something.
I'll certainly get back to you, Councillor Hyman, on the 2 points you've raised in terms of refuse and recycling, but our colleague Janet Guy is here from Environmental Health, who may be able to tell you a bit more about the recruitment side of things. I'm sorry if you didn't catch all that.
Jeanette, there you are. Are you going to be able to help us?
Hello, evening. What I would say is, yes, the additional funding was made available. but we haven't been able to recruit anyone. And we have recruited some contract staff, particularly to do food visits. But actually any sort of long-term stuff, no, recruitment, we haven't been able to recruit. We've been out to advertise posts a number of times, but just it haven't been successful. So yes, we're still looking at how to recover sort of the recovery for our food inspections. Hope that answers your question.
It does, thank you very much. And there's not a lot else we can add to it, is there? I'm sure you'll keep trying, but if the labour force isn't there, you just can't recruit, can you? So can we move on then to our second bit, the planning? Is everyone quite happy with? Thank you again, Nora, for stepping in. And we've got Sally, haven't we, who's going to welcome Sally. I don't know how many people have met Sally Busby in these difficult times. Normally we'd have bumped into you sort of day after day, but Sally is very kindly going to help us out with the planning. So I'd just like to introduce the report briefly and then we'll ask our questions. Thank you.
Absolutely. Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much, Chair. On behalf of Zach, I'd like to lead you through the report and refer members to page 32 of the report or page 58 of the agenda pack, whichever you're working from. Per Zach's narrative in the report, the development management did suffer in terms of functionality in this particular quarter. In general terms, targets were met in terms of the national and governmental requirements. However, from the report, it's very clear that difficulties with our local requirements, our local achievements and aspirations, we have struggled. Per request P151A, 153A and 123A do show the rudimentary output statistics, which are dates in terms of decisions that show without extension of times. Now, based on these figures and in general performance in improvement, as set out on the development management plan, we do have a structure of change that is in motion and a strategy in progress, which is currently being made. Included in the overall department restructure, applications are now managed through specific categories as teams in terms of category as opposed to geographic, thus allowing each development lead to build a specific strategy relevant to the application coming in. And with the aid of additional resources, I'm confident that these applications are going to start journeying through the process to a point of decision in a much more focused and streamlined way. If I can refer you specifically to page 33 and 34, which is page 59 and 60, referring to the complaints and the appeals. I'll touch on the complaints first, if I may. We had 45 in total for Q1, which is a amalgamation of level 1s and 2s, largely down to the validation delays. Whilst these figures are unacceptable completely, we have responded to these issues and implemented a structure of communications to facilitate actions both internally and externally to alleviate this number moving forward. Touching on the appeals, we had 19 in total. Now, unfortunately, you'll see from the report that there was no figures available at the time. And I'm embarrassed to say that was as a result of Horizon difficulties, which I will touch on shortly. But I can tell you we had 19 and 14 total were dismissed. That's 26% allowed, 74% dismissed. And as Zach refers in his report, this was impacted greatly by the 5 separate appeals relating to the heights in Hazelmere, which subsequently would have affected P152. Finally on Horizon, it's very clear that in the first quarter noted that there has been significant issues from Horizon, the implementation of the new software, which has obviously impacted the service greatly, and in terms of reporting figures. I am very pleased to say that we have made extensive progress in this regard over the last 2 months. And although it's obviously not going to reflect on these current figures, I am confident that future reporting is going to likely see the fruits of the work and the improvements made and give a good indication of the direction of change. That's it from me, Councillor. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Sally. I think we've all suffered from Horizon, and it's been really frustrating when you just can't get information easily. It just drives you mad. And I mentioned to you on a one-to-one that the other thing that really I would like to be able to do is select data much more easily. Because if I can't find the data on the website, I have to trouble an officer, which, then if you're busy, puts you further back. Whereas if I could go in, it's really running data that I find so difficult to get, the number of things that are happening, you just can't find them. You have to go in for each one rather than just pick out data, put in completions in Farnham. I should be able to just get that, rather than have to go back and count them one by one. So I'm sure, as I say, I didn't suffer alone, and I know, you're fully aware of the problems. What would anybody like to ask a question or make a comment, Joan?
Just following on from what you're saying, Chair, is there going to be any training for councillors on how to get optimum value from Horizon once all the gremlins have been sorted?
Absolutely. 2 points, if I may address. First, Chair, your comments made in terms of the filtering of data has certainly been taken on board, and we have put that forward for development. So that's point one. And yes, in terms of Horizon, we are, as part of the build, we are also building FAQs, process notes and videos in terms of how-tos from a layman's and also from an internal officer's perspective. So there will be an electronic and a physical manual available to all, and most definitely we can put on workshops and training sessions as and when required. That's beneficial to both sides, so I'm fully behind that 100%. Yes.
Thank you. That's really good news. Councillor Hyman.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. At the bottom of page 58, Zach has closed by saying the planning enforcement team continue to investigate a large number of complaints about breaches of planning legislation. I'm just wondering what the results are from that, but how much enforcement we've been able to do, because obviously it would be difficult if you can't go and speak to people in person. It's more difficult to and if people have got to hide away indoors, then they can't go out and enforce. But apart from that, I did speak to Sally when she was a relative newbie, I suppose, back April, May time, when we had we were suffering most from the problems of the Horizon system, and I did get a lot of help. It was very helpful. I didn't get involved any further than just trying to satisfy myself that we did have staff on top of the issue, and I was told at the time that we would have the backlog cleared. I think was by the end of August was the goal. I wonder whether we'd made that, whether we've still got any outstanding issues there, and whether there's anything that we as a committee can help Sally in highlighting if there's changes that do need to be made, or further changes that need to be made. Thanks.
Sally, can you answer that again, please?
Certainly, yes. Thank you, Councillor Hyman. Yeah, yes. So in terms of page 58, unfortunately, I don't have the answers, but I can certainly get some response for you and email you if I may. And in terms of the backlog, we didn't make August, and unfortunately, not wishing to divert a response or shirk a response, but Horizon was vastly behind that. The target date now is Christmas, and we've gone from a almost 700 validation backlog to 400. So we've made huge strides in terms of the backlog, and in terms of date, we are processing through middle of July and end of July now, which is a massive improvement on where we were. We do have a plan in place, a resource plan in place, that we meet the zero deadline by the end of the year, which we've just had signed off over this last 2 weeks, and I'm very confident that we're going to get there. What we have done in order to slightly ease the pain is we've rotated and addressed the validation technicians that we have in-house so that they are hitting multiple sectors and multiple dates across the board, so that we are actually meeting some of the deadlines of the public out there. So it's not all bad news.
Thank you. I mean, I think we all get frustrated, the public, with how slowly it takes to get their application through, especially a relatively simple one. And then I think enforcement drives us all mad, because it just seems to be such a slow process. When you have a clear breach that the public just think you should be able to clear up in an afternoon, it's very difficult to explain to them why it takes that long to get something that is so blatantly wrong. There's one in my ward, which everyone knows, that's been put up completely wrongly. And it's years, we're still going through the processes, and the public just really doesn't get that at all,
No. Yeah, no, understood. I will get an answer for you and email you if I may.
That would be lovely. Anybody else? I've got Councillor Hyman again. Would anybody else like to speak before I take Councillor Hyman? Councillor Hyman?
I just wanted to thank Sally for her candour and straightforwardness in answering the question, because that's very refreshing. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.
I think we all appreciate your candour. I think it's good news, because when we want an answer on planning, it's good to be able to get one, even if it's I'll have to come back to you, or I'm not quite sure and I'll ask somebody else. At least it's an answer that's direct, and I think we're all grateful for that. So no other questions on planning. I mean, the obvious one to me is still this problem of completions, because it's it's just a nightmare, isn't it? Getting houses built, getting the permissions through, and then getting them actually built, because until we do that, we're so vulnerable in planning appeals.
I think you're right. I mean, absolutely. And it's difficult because at the moment I'm addressing a quarter that was obviously very negative and on a spiral of difficult returns. However, as Councillor Hyman quite rightly said, in a few weeks' time we'll have some new figures out which will really show the direction that we're going. And I am confident. I'm genuinely not saying it for the audience. I am confident that we do have a positive uptrend in the direction that we're going. We've changed the way we address the public. We've changed the way we address cases in a more streamlined manner, as well as in a more focused direction, rather than all officers hitting one particular strategy. We've honed it accordingly. So I am confident, if I can ask for your patience, that you will see a direction of change at the next reporting section.
Thank you for that. We look forward to that, and I think we all agree that the structure has to be better to have officers focused, because if they're all over the place in one thing, they'll be all over the place in the other. Whereas if we have a structure that's really focused, we should be able to get better decisions. Better decisions should eventually feed into the completions, which obviously we all need. Right, if everyone's quite happy, I'd like to thank Sally for stepping in, and Nora again, and we'll move on to item 7. Oh, I've no idea who's this. Oh, it's Jeanette. It's Jeanette. Sorry, Jeanette, I've got it written down. I'm just being. Oh, and Kelvin, you're going to speak. Who's going first?
Sorry, Chair, could I come back on? There's one element of my service that's pertinent to the Environment ONS committee. Are you okay if I talk through that section? I know Matt, the Green Spaces manager, is in the chamber, but if I could talk through that, would that be helpful?
Which page are you referring to?
It's page 48 of the agenda. That's Parks and Countryside.
Thank
you. So I won't start with it's been a challenging quarter. However, it has been an extremely busy one. The green spaces throughout the borough were saw extremely high visitor numbers throughout the period. I've highlighted in my report French and Great Ponds just for interest, to demonstrate the pressures that one of the sites received over the weekend of the 13th and 14th of June. I think I have summarised some of the issues in the table, but we had over 3,000 cars counted over that weekend attending the site. And I'd really like to go on record as just thanking the Countryside team and all officers really are dealing with an extremely pressurised situation. And also to just go on record saying the work of the stakeholder group, chaired by Councillor Townsend, but the work with Surrey County Council, Guildford Borough Council and the parish, as well as the National Trust and the police. What I was pleased to see over that weekend is how we tried to minimise and successfully minimise the impact on some of our local residents in that area. So that was one of the pleasing things from the demand pressed on the site. In this quarter, we also introduced a major change to our mowing regime, supporting the No Mow May and Let It Bloom June to promote diverse biodiversity in the borough. As I've detailed in the report, we did receive considerable sort of feedback on these initiatives, and I've tried to summarise them there for all members. All of the feedback that we have received during this period will feed into a new mowing regime going forward, and we've just set up a key project group looking at the cutting regime this winter to bring in to the next year. Many lessons have been learned, and these will help inform the process going forward, and we'd like to thank councillors, residents, stakeholders for all their feedback. One other element I'd just like to bring to the attention of the committee is during this period, my tree risk management team took on the responsibility of TPOs for the planning tree service. I've been really pleased with the efforts they've made during this quarter and into the second quarter, where we've reduced the backlog on TPOs and tree planning matters. And we're looking to create a much more resilient combined service going forward, which I can report on in latter quarters. Generally, there aren't any indicators for this committee to look at, but all I would note that the finances are good for my service, largely down to the leisure centres improving better than expected and visitor numbers returning. I thank you, Chair, for letting me speak, but that was just one element that was pertinent to this ONS, and I thought it was worthwhile presenting.
We're very grateful. It gives us a chance to have another moan about No Mow May, doesn't it, really? And, you know, I think what I would say about it is that it works in certain areas beautifully. I mean, if you go up to Scotland, it's wonderful because they've got everywhere is not cut, but the villages are pristine. You know, so where people actually live is pristine. And then, you know, as soon as you go into the open road, you get lovely, you know, verges and whatever. And I think that the thrust that we had in Farnham, and I'm sure elsewhere, to leave every bit uncut. I mean, we had people in the chantries falling over because they couldn't see where the curbs were. You know, I mean, it was just, we just went a bit too far, I think. And I know I'm not alone. I'm sorry, Councillor Gale isn't here because she had to pull out right at the last minute, because I know she had a lot of complaints in her area about that. But of course, the growth this year has been stupid too, hasn't it? Everything's just gone wild. Anybody wish to speak on this one? Yes, I just wondered if anybody else. Councillor Hyman?
Yes, thank you. You're right. If we start off with Frensham, we look at the figures which is in bullet points at the top of page 49. We've given out fractionally more fixed penalty notices than we've extinguished fires and barbecues. I'd like to see far more penalty notices than fires extinguished, frankly. just looking at comparatively in the number of bags of litter, I am concerned, really, actually, about where it says one member of staff injured. I don't know whether we're able to be given some that sort of thing. I would like, as a councillor, to be told whether it's serious or not, and whether there's something that we should be, that we ourselves should do. I can understand that if people are having tickets stuck on their windows, then perhaps I'm surprised that only 4 were verbally abused. People don't like having tickets stuck on their windows, but the actual physical injury is another matter. I don't know whether you're able to tell us anything more about that. But in relation to the No Mow May and Let It Bloom June, To me, I see that as being a public relations disaster. I appreciate Kelvin's candor, but I don't think that I'm not entirely sure what I've heard from the executive that lessons have been learned or lessons are being learned in this respect, because I'm not hearing the apologies that I would expect to hear for all the amount of work that has caused other people. Somebody's had to do the work, and now I know also that our team who are going around now trying to from Continental, who are trying to mow, their machines just aren't up to the job of mowing something. The amount of grass I've had to mow myself, and the cost to me personally in time and petrol and inconvenience in mowing things and strimming junctions and that sort of thing, because this stuff's got to be done, and Waverley has dropped the ball and hasn't done it, and we're still been paying people to do the work. It's a bit galling when you're doing all the work when somebody else has been paid to do it, but they've been told they don't have to. Now, I want to see that for next year, it is an opt-in rather than opt-out. I do not want it to be a case of we've got exactly the same happening again next May and June, just because, oh, you didn't tell us that bit had to be mowed. I want each ward councillor to be told which are the areas, identified which of the areas that are under the contract for Surrey and for Waverley, because they're sort of done together by Continental, and they've got on their personal handheld devices, the operatives have got maps of the borough, and they can show that's Surrey's bit, and we do that twice a year, and that's Waverley's bit, and we do that on a fortnightly basis, what we would do normally. We need that information for each of our councillors, for our councillors to be able to say, right, that bit there we definitely want doing. You cannot mow that if you like. So it's effectively an opt-in to not mowing things that we're faced with, rather than what we were faced with this year, which was no communication, suddenly dumped on us, and a great deal of embarrassment and a lot of hard work for those of us who've had to pick up the pieces from it. So it's not Kelvin's fault, I appreciate that, but nevertheless, it is something which has taken up far too much of people's time and should never have happened. It shouldn't have been dealt with the way that it was. I'm sorry, but I think someone has to say it. No, I do appreciate there were some lovely wildflowers in some places, but very few. I mean, certainly the kids getting nits and not being able to use playing fields and things is ridiculous, really.
Thank you. I won't get an answer for you from Kelvin just yet. I'll take Councillor Else, and then perhaps if Kelvin wants to come back and summarise. Councillor Else.
Thank you, Chairman. I echo Councillor Hyman's comments practically 100%. My village doesn't look nice. My village looks appalling. The hedges are overgrown as well as the grass. Somebody's been spraying something somewhere. All the weeds in the gutter and at the side of the pavements in many areas are brown. They're dead. What's going to happen to them? Are they just going to be left there? Up to 2-3 feet high grass, just mown and left, which we know. We've already covered that several times, I know, but there's nothing to congratulate ourselves for on this, I don't think. I'm ashamed, actually, of No Mow May and Bloom in June and whatever happened to July, August and September. Now we're in October and we're still in a mess. So presumably most of my residents in Elstead are still paying their council tax. And what part of that council tax actually is put to grounds maintenance, I don't know, but yes, they need a bit of a refund, I think, quite frankly. I did ask a question at the last one, what have Continental been doing all summer? And that was what was going to come back to this committee. I'm interested to know. Thank you.
No, we'll ask that question in a second. Just going back to what I said right at the beginning, it can work beautifully if you do the mow in the right place, but the villages are not the place for it. The villages should be pristine, and then they look better. People are happier in their area. They can do what they like in their back gardens, it's a different matter. Kelvin, do you want to come back on that? We don't think it was a great success.
I'll come back. Yes, thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Chair. One thing I'll let Matt, who's in the office, cover off the injury to the colleague at Frensham. It wasn't serious, but he can give them more detail and also cover off what have Continental been doing, because they certainly haven't been lying around during this quarter. We take on board the comments. You know, we are committed to sort of biodiversity within the borough, but we've got the PID coming forward, and I can assure councillors that consultation and engagement will be very much part of that project to ensure that we hit both our targets of biodiversity, increasing biodiversity in the borough, as well as maintaining areas that should be kept at a greater cutting regime. So please take on board that we will move forward with that positively, and that will be very much part and parcel of our project. If I'll pass over to Matt for the other comments.
Thanks, Matt. Yes, please.
Right, yeah, I'll start with the comments about the staff member being injured. Unfortunately, when we had to shut the car park at Frensham, we did have a motorcyclist who didn't agree with that. This was to cope with the huge amount of visitors, and they decided to drive around the gate and they ran over the foot of a member of staff. Luckily, it wasn't too serious, and it was reported to the police. I'll also comment on the fires and barbecues that were extinguished. During this quarter, we were not able to issue FPNs for fires and barbecues because the PSPO for fires and barbecues in the borough wasn't in place at the time, but it has since been put in place, so we can now issue FPNs for fires and barbecues at Frensham, Great Pond and Common. In regards to Continental Landscapes and their members of staff, when they weren't mowing during May and June, they were undertaking other tasks on the contract. Primarily, they were dealing with weed control in parks, some housing areas and playgrounds. And as part of the council's pesticide policy, we have promised to go pesticide free in our playgrounds in the first year since adoption. So these staff were working on trying to keep on top of the weeds. That was extended into the rest of the parks and recreation grounds. And also we were doing some edging along paths as well in other areas, and indeed the housing areas. It's quite a labour intensive task to do that, to not use pesticides and to manually clear weeds. So that took up most of the time for those few months when we weren't cutting.
Well, let me take Councillor James first, she indicated.
That's a fascinating answer. So next year, if we're going to cut grass and stuff, presumably then they aren't going to edge, or they aren't going to do all the weeding and everything else that they did during that time. So are they going to have more staff to do what they did during that no mow May and do grass cutting? Or is the cost of the contract going to absolutely rocket? Because lovely to do something else, but then that job will obviously be not done when we go back to mowing. So that it was a sort of, well, they're not doing this, so they'll do something else. So when they're not doing the something else, that's not going to be done.
Sorry about that. No, that's okay. No. I mean, next year, obviously, there'll be changes to the mowing campaign, so there will be mowing a lot more. So yes, you're quite right. You won't have that pool of staff we could put onto manual weed control. There will be areas of weed control at the moment where we will still use herbicides. I mean, we try to advance not using them at this during this year because we have the availability of staff. So next year, some of the areas will probably have to be sprayed with a herbicide. We are also trialling other methods of weed control, such as spraying acetic acid, basically vinegar, which does kill the weeds, but it's not as effective. So you're quite right. We won't have that pool of people there to do the manual weed control, but there are other methods we can look at using going forward.
Councillor Hyman, do you wish to come back before we move on?
No, the points have been covered and made very well. Thank you.
Does anybody else wish to speak to that? Yeah, Councillor Reid.
I'd just like clarification again on the issue of what was it? Yes, I think it's the problem we have with, again, with the workforce. Was I right in hearing that you said, Officer Vickers, is it, that they were actually, the workforce were actually helping out with the TPOs and tree work?
Right, if there's no other question, I'll invite Kelvin back anyway to sum up, and he can answer that question on the tree work that they've taken over from planning, if you would, please. Sorry, telling you what to do rather than asking you. So, sorry, very rude.
No, that's absolutely fine, Chair. With regard to the planning and tree work, so during this quarter, several key officers from the planning service in the tree section moved on and left Waverley. So what we did is expand the tree risk management team to take on the TPOs and any tree planning service requirements during this quarter. What we've also done is recruit to the vacant posts that were filled in planning, and going forward we will look to create one tree service for the council, so that will cover both tree risk management as well as the planning advice to planning applications relating to trees. Again, if I've missed anything, Matt will be able to answer these questions, but we believe that will create a much more resilient service going forward. So that's what we'll be doing on the tree processes going into the next quarter.
Yeah, if I may, I'll just confirm, the staff that we're looking at helping out with the tree planning side, that they're not our contracted staff who've been working on the grounds maintenance contract. It's actual Waverley officers. So we've been sort of flexing our resources to help with the backlog of tree cases that are built up.
Councillor Elsh, you wish to come back?
Thank you, Chairman. Now, I'm just interested to know how we're coming along with the new equipment that Continental need in order to deal with what they haven't been able to deal with this year. Thank you.
Well, for this year, they have drafted in some extra cutting and collecting equipment that we have started using on some of the sites to bring the grass levels down and remove the arisings. And for next season, as part of the work we're doing, we're going to be starting conversations with Continental about different equipment they could look to invest in. We can't complete those conversations until we've done our huge piece of mapping work on the whole of the borough to decide exactly what grass cutting specifications we're going to do in which area, because that will then help determine the equipment, the size of it, and type we will need to complete the task.
Yes, do come back.
Thank you very much. Just a quick one then. At whose expense is this going to be? At our expense, and do we know what that level of expense might be to buy new equipment?
The aim is to do it within the existing budgets and to not overspend. That's the general aim of the council budgeting. Obviously, if there are difficulties with that, we'll have to bring a report back to the executive to alert them to the prospect there may be extra charges.
Thank you. Oh, Councillor Reid.
Could Officer Lank please tell us when is the best time to cut a hedge? Because I think that was referred to, and I think during nesting season, hedges should not be cut.
The reason I smiled, it sounded as though you wanted personal gardening advice, you know. Yeah.
Well, there's several answers to that one. Yes, depending on the plant type and flowering would depend, but generally, I've always said grounds maintenance is not gardening, and it isn't. It is different. We are acutely aware of avoiding or trying to avoid birds nesting in hedges, which is generally March to September. We try our best to not cut them during that time. However, if there are hedges overgrowing car parking areas or footpaths, you know, we have a requirement in the contract, we can cut them back, but we have to be careful. So generally the main hedge cutting season starts late September, October onwards.
But I would like to move on. I did ask Jeanette some time back. She's disappeared from my screen, which is rather worrying. Oh, she's down there in a small picture, yes. Can we get her a slightly bigger, or does she get bigger when she speaks?
I'm here. Do you want me to introduce the next item then?
Right, thank you, Jeanette. I'm delighted to see you're still with us. We have the screen, the format on the screen changed. Yes, please, if you would like to take us on to the annual air quality report.
Well, the report presents the 2021 annual air quality annual status report, which reviews the data collected in 2020. It also seeks views on a suggested way forward to support the development of a new air quality strategy and action plan that aligns with the climate change and sustainability strategy, the carbon neutrality action plan, and work underway on the Farnham optimised infrastructure plan. Key findings were that in 2020 was an unusual year for air quality, significantly impacted by COVID-19. There were no exceedances of the annual objective concentration for nitrogen dioxide at locations relevant for human exposure anywhere in Waverley Borough Council, and the average reduction of nitrogen dioxide concentrations at the automatic monitoring locations in 2020 compared to previous years was about 20%, a little bit more than that actually, and decreases ranged across the diffusion tube network from 10% to 32%. The greatest decreases being on those busy congested roads, the smaller percentage decreases on those more rural roads. The key completed measures and the priorities for 2021-22 are detailed in the report, so I won't go through all of those, but I will note that certainly one of the priorities for the coming year is to work with stakeholders to review actions to improve air quality and develop an air quality strategy for Waverley, incorporating an updated air quality action plan. So sort of as to the way forward, in previous years, revisions of any action plan were overseen by the Air Quality Steering Group, and especially regarding air quality in Farnham, the Farnham Air Quality Working Group, which then fed into the steering group. Certainly these groups have not met for a little while, and since then Waverley have declared a climate emergency, adopted a climate change and sustainability strategy, and approved the carbon neutrality action plan. In addition, the Farnham Infrastructure Board has been established to develop the Farnham Optimised Infrastructure Programme, which aims to tackle traffic-related issues, amongst other things, including air quality. So the thought is that it's the right time to look at developing a sort of an air quality action plan that aligns with the climate change and sustainability strategy, the carbon neutrality action plan, and the Farnham Optimised Infrastructure plan. A climate emergency board is being created, and it's considered appropriate for this to take the place of the air quality steering group going forward, and that the more focused work on air quality in Farnham would seem to fit within the work of the Farnham Infrastructure Board, and we requested views on that. I don't know whether Councillor Williams is there and wants to add anything to that.
No, I think you've expressed it very eloquently, and clearly we'd like to hear the views on that, on the proposals relating to the Climate Emergency Board taking on the work that was previously undertaken by the Air Quality Monitoring Board and Air Quality Steering Group and the Farnham Infrastructure Board, because of its kind of broad brief, taking on the work that was previously undertaken by the Farnham Air Quality Monitoring Board. But thanks, I've got nothing else to add at this point, unless there's any kind of questions on that.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. I'm most confused because right at the beginning of my tenure here, we decided that there were so many boards looking at air quality. If you remember, there seemed to be one here, one there, one everywhere. You know, they haven't met, and we've now got climate emergency, and we've now got the FIP, and there seems to be an awful lot of balls in the air, is basically what I'm saying. And if the Climate Emergency Board can actually get its act together and get a straight line and some strategy, that would be really good. I mean, one of our issues, as we know with air quality, is that we monitor it, but we don't actually cure it. So if the Climate Emergency Board actually makes a positive contribution to that, then obviously I think we'd support it. Councillor James.
Thank you, Chairman. As you know, I have a sort of slight beef about when it comes to electric vehicles, and the executive did not listen to us last time and about the 50% reduction, but actually we won the day on that one, on an electric one. I'm on page 101, measure 2 is to support the use of electric and hybrid vehicles. And it says phase 1 aims to deliver 80 on-street fast charging points by November. Now, does that mean that I'm not going to be able to park in 80 places because I haven't got an electric car? So that is discriminating again against people who don't have an electric car. And rather like, as I always bring up, the Hazelmere car park, which always has 2 empty places because it's an electrical charging place and I can't park in them. So I go round and round and round waiting for a car to move out when there are 2 empty spaces. And so presumably once they've parked, they can charge their car and stay as long as they're, obviously, if it's, whether these are paying car parking spaces on street or just doesn't say that, or are they just on street car parking? Like, you know, I could park, I don't know, in Milford or somewhere. And if they put an electric car parking charging point there, I can't park there. And is that car going to be able to park all day there and charge its car? So I'm not happy with that one. And just following on from that one on measure 6, I do sit on the taxi and licensing committee, so I will bring it out there. But it says, from January 31, the council will not license vehicles unless they are ULEV. But so what about the old cars that are the limousines, that are petrol cars, that are going to be more than 10 years old? There will have to be exceptions. So that policy cannot be as it is unless there are exceptions. But so going back to the 80 car parking spaces, I'm not in favour of that, Madam Chairman. Sorry.
You don't have to apologise to me. I'm not in favour either, as you know.
So perhaps the
yes, indeed. We'll go back to them at the end. I've got Councillor Hyman and then Councillor Egan.
Thanks. Actually, there's a lot of pages here and there's a lot of things to bring up. So I hope we're going to be able to sort of like separate it out into because obviously I would like to look at some of the details of what's in the report, as well as the overview that we've been given by Jeanette. I was very pleased, I must say, when Jeanette joined us back in, I think it was 2017, 2018 time. And we put together the Farnham Air Quality Board because that was, although when I'd become the chairman of Environment ONS, brought air quality onto the agenda and to get things done, and the executive at that time decided, well, they didn't want me in charge of that, so they created their own executive, the air quality steering group instead, under the executive's control. But we did get, with Jeanette's help and Catherine Powell as well, actually, on the Farnham side of it, a lot of work done on air quality issues, on getting the, let's say, optimizing the diffusion tube sites, that sort of thing. There was a lot of work done. My concern now, of course, is that because of the problems that we'd had with the 2016 figures, the data there from what was called the air quality fraud, and since then, having data, I don't think that we've actually had any years of really comparable data ever since about 2016. And if we're going to be moving the monitoring station, the automatic monitoring station, in the coming year, that'll probably wipe out another 2 years worth of figures that we don't actually really have proper comparative data for. It is a responsibility in law that we do the monitoring. Obviously, we're restricted by reality, but this is something that I think the council should be giving a lot more priority to. And I'm sure Jeanette agrees, actually. The same applies to having an air quality action plan. We don't have an action plan, a genuine one, to actually bring the NO2 levels down to within legal limits. Never have had since 2008, when the first air quality action plan was put in place. I think the planning policy area, which is covered under paragraph 182 of the National Planning Policy Framework, that needs to be put into our air quality action plan, most certainly, so that Farnham does get so that the in combination effect or cumulative effect of development on air quality is actually accounted for in our planning decisions. There's a lot in this report which we need to start taking it seriously, because as far as I'm concerned, the proposal which the proposals to have the Farnham board looking after air quality side of it is totally unacceptable. It's Waverley's responsibility in law to have the air quality action plan. It is Surrey County Council's responsibility in law to work with Waverley in order to effectively populate that plan and put real, genuine, funded and scheduled measures in place. That's never happened yet. Farnham has been stitched up for many years by not doing this properly, and it's all because of the East Street scheme, silly roads changes that were within that.
Stop you. I'm not sure. I'm not trying to stop you from talking, but you know, I really don't want to go over every single bit in this. We've got this plan to note. We know what the problems are with measuring air quality. We know who's got the responsibility. I was rather assuming the Climate Emergency Board would have everybody in it. You know, it would be a across the board, as it were, so that we weren't all working on our little silos and we were actually working together to improve the air quality. Is that not how it's going to be?
Not the understanding that I have. I mean, I thought there was going to be an executive board, which, again, there would be no real opportunity for scrutiny and no real opportunity for Waverley members' involvement, which you know, is a problem also with the Farnham board, because the Farnham board actually has no decision-making powers.
No, I'm not
whatsoever.
talking about the Farnham Infrastructure Project Board. I'm talking about this, what I thought was a new board. We'll clarify that at the end. Can I take somebody else just for a bit, please? Councillor Heath, yeah.
Okay, if I can come back on a specific question.
But please, yes. I mean, by all means, ask questions. But, you know, as I say, I really don't want to go back over the history of East Street and all sorts of things. And 2016 was a heck of a long time ago now. Councillor Heath.
2008 was even further back.
I'm sorry, thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to come back on Councillor James's comments. I mean, I've recently purchased an electric vehicle because, you know, that is the direction of travel, that is national government policy, and there is definitely a chicken and egg situation when you look in terms of moving forward. I think we have a duty to support Surrey-wide infrastructure project, because you know, people are going to be stranded if they're not able to buy new petrol cars, and we haven't made progress on the infrastructure, and we have a part to play in that. So I just wanted the counter argument to be noted. Thank you.
Yeah, we agreed to disagree at the council, you know, the committee meeting where we discussed that, because when we're looking at the car parking strategy, because we were split down the middle, I think, you know, it's not that anyone's pushing against that, but we're just saying, as things stand at the moment, you know, we feel the over provision to the modal shift, the over provision is really working against some of the poorest in our community. That's all we're saying. But we agreed to disagree then, and I'm sure we'll agree to disagree now. That's the whole point, isn't it, of growing up. Councillor Else.
Thank you, Chairman. I have read this from cover to cover. I have understood, I wouldn't like to put a number. I really wouldn't. It's written by some sort of expert, I'm sure. I am probably not expected to be able to understand the whole thing. I hope I'm not anyway. We have to look at an awful lot of things on scrutiny, not just this. I would really have appreciated a bit of a layman's version of some of the issues, but I'd just like to shout out for the rural areas of Waverley, if I may, because obviously the Farnham, Godalming, Hazelmere, Cranley feature large in this because they do have traffic that stacks up in their towns and villages. Townsend Village. However, I live in a village which sees something like 10,000 vehicle movements a day through my village. And what I don't know, and what I couldn't tell my residents, should I be asked, and I have been actually in the past, is what danger that represents for them. What level of air pollution might we be expecting in the rural areas? I don't just mean to concentrate on my village, but that's all I can talk about with any certainty. So what I'd like to know is there a danger? These management areas that are placed here and there, and there are portable ones. I think there's a bit of portability from what I can gather. All these numbers on the grid at the back mean absolutely nothing to me because I don't know where they are. You know, there's an awful lot of information, but what is it actually telling us? Not very much. So I'd love to know whether Elstead has ever had its air quality measured, or indeed any other village, and what criteria might be applied to a dangerous level of air quality in a village with a, you know, with a busy road running through it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Can we call Jeanette in here for a bit of help then? We're struggling to work out exactly what we're going to end up with in terms of a climate emergency board. Can you just clarify that? And can you answer Councillor Elsa's point about what measurement goes on in a village like Elstead as opposed to just in the towns?
Okay, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry, it wasn't clear if you can. Sort of the actual nature of the report, it's all prescribed by DEFRA, and we have to follow that certain format. We have to do all the tables, they're all prescribed, and you have to fill out a template, and that's the way you have to submit it to DEFRA to get it marked or reviewed. So there's no, the executive summary does try to summarise points, but that's the way that and why it is written as it is. When you look at pollution, the main sources of nitrogen dioxide are traffic. So inevitably you'll get higher levels on busier, congested, stop-start roads. In villages, they tend to be more free-flowing without so much congested traffic. So yeah, generally, if you don't have a problem in your towns, you wouldn't have a problem in your rural roads. Certainly, we have measured nitrogen dioxide from Elstead in the past. The levels were nowhere near the air quality objective. So obviously when we looked to review, we didn't measure. I don't think we continue to measure in Elstead, but that's the reason why, because they were significantly below the objective. So hopefully that goes some way to answering your question. That being said, we assess things against DEFRA's objectives, which are there to protect health. But if you look at, say, the WHO guidelines, they've just reviewed their guidelines, then some of the levels are a lot lower than the UK or England objectives. We wait to see what the government is going to do to respond to the updated WHO guidelines. So hopefully I've answered that question. I think there was one about EV taxis and 80 chargers. That is the 80 chargers, so 40 twin chargers is across 4 council areas in Surrey there, and you will see it in on measure 2, is it page 101, that it does say that it part of that it will be 10 twin points in Waverley, so it'll be 20 parking or it'll be 10 sort of chargers each, or on each charger serving 2 parking spots. And actually this is about, that particular project is about on-street parking, if you like, a lot of people who have off-street parking, they will be able to charge their cars in the future while they're sat on their drive. But people who don't have driveways and off-street parking will find that more difficult. So this was about a pilot project looking at how to deliver that. If you need more information on that, then I would have to go and find that out from Surrey County Council. As far as that, then there was a question about the taxi licensing policy. That is the policy. You know, if you have concerns about it, then I would need to raise that with licensing manager and Richard Homer, the head of service, to see if they want to address those issues. And presumably take further reports to committee. Then there was a range of questions from Councillor Hyman. About one was about an air quality action plan. Yes, we know we need to review it, and part of this report talks about reviewing it and how we might review it. Then there was about the Farnham board and how you felt that was unacceptable. I mean, clearly this is one suggestion. We're looking for feedback, and many of the actions within the carbon neutrality action plan, will help air quality. And whilst they are separate things, looking at carbon and air quality, that they often the actions they take will have a synergistic effect on sort of air quality as well as saving carbon emissions. So that's why that seemed a sensible way forward. I think I've answered all the questions that raised, but if there's any others, then let me know.
I think you probably have. Interestingly enough, I was on the local committee when they started talking about the EV chargers. And the officers at Surrey were quite surprised how little support there was for them from the residents. I mean, they weren't queuing up to have them on their street. And, we said at the time, we didn't think they would be, for all the reasons that are the difficulty, as Councillor James said, if somebody comes and puts the car there and they come home from work and, there's nowhere for them to park, it was going to create tension. And certainly, we didn't have a great number of streets who wanted them in Farnham. I remember that. I still haven't got in my head who's going to write what. I mean, all the way through this, I'm a bit like Councillor Else. I'm really not interested in the detail. I'm interested in the, what we have to do. And as long as I've been the chairman here, it's always been handed out to other boards, but they haven't actually done anything. They haven't met. I don't mean being lazy. I mean, just haven't met. And I just wondered, this climate emergency board, is this actually going to be a board of a great range of people, or is it, as Councillor Hyman thinks, just the executive under another name?
I think I would hand over to Councillor Williams to give his thoughts on that. I mean, I've been advised of what the suggestion is going forward. It seems a sensible solution. But as for the specifics and how it might work, I can't feed back on that at this moment. I don't know whether Councillor Williams has anything else to offer.
You've been more than helpful, so don't apologise for that. You've been really good at answering all our questions. I'll take Councillor Williams, but can we be brief, Councillor Williams, please?
Yeah, of course, and I'll answer the question. I mean, the Climate Emergency Board was set up. It was agreed by the full council that it should be set up. The composition has been determined, and it's actually already met. I can't remember the exact composition of the Climate Emergency Board, but there's a group of cross-party group of councillors that are actually in the process as we or have started the process as we speak of monitoring our performance against the carbon neutrality action plan. It therefore seems to be the appropriate board because of the link that Jeanette has just outlined between carbon reduction and air quality, that should take the role of the air quality steering group under its wing. So I hope that kind of clarifies the position with regard to the Climate Emergency Board. Just on the question of electric charging points, and I know this will be an ongoing issue, just really want to add to what Jeanette has just sort of pointed out, that on-street charging points are there to provide an opportunity for those who don't have private garages or private drives and off-street parking to acquire electric vehicles. And there will be a growth. There already has been a growth in the ownership of electric vehicles over time. And the present government has decreed that it will no longer be legal to sell petrol and diesel vehicles from 2030. So, I mean, it is absolutely sensible that we, in the light of that growth, should be making provision for all our residents to enable them all to be able to acquire electric vehicles and to be working with Surrey County Council in terms of rolling out on-street electrical vehicle charging points, and I hope that answers the question.
It does. Thank you very much. The fact remains that we pay our road tax and we are allowed, in theory, to park anywhere on the public highway. You know, and by doing this, you're cutting out certain of us from being able to park on the public highway. I still, and I probably go to my grave, not knowing why Surrey and Waverley have to provide these, and I don't get it. I really don't. I mean, I can understand the words and I can put them in a sort of sentence, but I still don't get it. You know, if I want my petrol and want diesel, I'm afraid at the moment, I must confess, I go to a petrol station. I mean, well, used to until Friday. But, you know, I just don't get it. But I really don't want to prolong this. Thank you for that explanation. So the board's just taking in the work of the other boards that have never met, is what you're saying. So can we draw a line under this unless anyone's got something really pressing, and take it out of the meeting if it's a really detailed question? Because I really don't think that's the function of this board. I mean, if we're quite happy with the Climate Emergency Board taking over the air quality strategy and action plan, I presume that they're taking over the both, and we'll deal with them. And if you are not happy, Councillor Hyman, so we'll note that.
It's a matter of that these are legal responsibilities, and to jumble them up with things which aren't necessarily legal responsibilities and which are more aspirational is the wrong thing to do, and it's the way to ensure that nothing is done. And bear in mind, nothing's been done for the past 13, 15 years and more, and there have been numerous deadlines which have been set in internationally in international agreements, which we've completely ignored and done nothing about, and we have to make sure that something is done about it. But I've got one specific question that I want to address: the way that we do things, and would like Jeanette's comments on this, because I think it's important that we look at, if we go to let me just see if I can get back to the page again. I had it open in front of me a second ago. It's not that one.
What does it relate to?
It's to do with the with bias correction figures, bias correction for the data. We have data. I think most members can understand that we have diffusion tubes in many places across the borough, about 53 or 55 of them, and they're all listed in here, and there's maps which show us exactly where those are as well, so people can see it. It is all in here, and I think it's very good the way that it's reported. When we get that data, it goes off to the tubes are collected monthly, and they go off to a fund.
We know all this. Can you get to the question for Jeanette, please?
We then need to correct it. What we've done historically is treat the receptor, i.e. the thing that is harmed by the nitrogen dioxide, as being a building. So we put the diffusion tube on a building, and then we measure how far away it is from the source, which is the exhaust. The curbside is actually how where we assume the source is. When you look at other areas like Frimley on the A331, at the end of the A331, there was a load of funding made available to improve air quality there. There are no buildings. The receptors are people. Now, in Farnham and Godalming across Waverley, we're not treating it as though the receptors are people. We have people a lot closer to the source, the exhausts, especially with COVID measures, than the diffusion tubes are. So can we, well, I think this is one of the most important things about, because there's no point us acting according to data which is being corrected or adjusted.
Well, ask Jeanette the question, please.
Should we be using the location of people as the receptors rather than assume that buildings themselves are receptors? Because it's motorists, cyclists, and you know, pedestrians who are the receptors, surely. And should we be adjusting in the opposite direction, actually, rather than adjusting figures down, adjust them upwards, because they're closer than the diff tubes to the source?
Good question, Councillor Hyman. Jeanette, are you there to answer it for us, please?
I am. Okay, so when there are various air quality objectives. There are annual objectives for nitrogen dioxide and other pollutants, say particulates, and they are the relevant receptors for those objectives are where people might be exposed for the year. So that will be on dwellings, things like that. Then there are short-term objectives, such as the 1 hour objective for nitrogen dioxide, and that protects against acute effects. And yes, they are relevant to where any members of the public might be exposed for over 1 hour, such as cafe pavements, things like that. Certainly our automatic analyzers will measure down to the 1 hour, and we know that we don't have no exceedances really of the 1 hour objective for nitrogen dioxide, or indeed the short-term objective last year, which is a 24-hour objective for particulates, certainly in Farnham. Then diffusion tubes, they won't measure for over hourly. They give you a monthly measure, and actually then you average those for 12 months. Then you do bias adjust them. But the reason why they're on properties is because that's where people live. And that's why, for example, we do have tubes, perhaps lower down on the ground floor level, on some roads, say in Farnham, but we have 3 tubes at first floor level in Farnham, because that's where the receptors are. They're flats above shops. And we wanted to make sure that we were measuring the pollution levels there. And it's unusual for people for councils to necessarily do that, but I particularly wanted to do that so that we were measuring the pollution where people will be exposed for the over a year. So, and certainly where we measure, there's sort of a rule of thumb that if levels are not greater than 60 micrograms per cubic metre averaged over a year for nitrogen dioxide, then there's very little risk, so no risk of exceeding the 1 hour short-term objective. Well, the levels that we have in Waverley would suggest that the short-term 1 hour objective is not exceeded anywhere in Waverley. I mean, yes, if I go and sit underneath an exhaust pipe, then, you know, and I sit there for a whole year, I'm sure I will be exposed, but I don't do that. So I hope that answers your question, but we try to address and measure where people are exposed, and yeah, so there we are. I don't know if you have any other question, Councillor Hyman.
I think you've done more than enough, and I think any other questions can be taken outside the meeting, and we'll move to the recommendations, I think, unless anyone's got anything burning. If we're getting in, drilling down into that much detail, but thank you so much. You know, you've been very patient and very informative. It just says on page 77, there is a recommendation there to receive the report, which I'm sure we've done. We've made comments supporting the new air quality strategy and action plan. I can't believe anyone doesn't wish to support that. Councillor Hyman presumably wants to have his name stated clearly that he doesn't think that the Climate Emergency Board should take over the air quality work. And I think we've aired our views on the other matters to do with this. So is everyone quite happy that we do this, Councillor Else?
On the point of order, Madam Chair, I can clarify Councillor Hyman's question on the legality.
No, would you do that after the meeting, please?
I'm very happy to do that after the meeting, but it is entirely legal what we are doing, or what we are proposing. We have checked out legal advice,
right.
And then Councillor Hyman may disagree, but we have checked out legal advice on that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Else. Sorry, thank you for that. So is everyone quite happy to support those recommendations and put our thoughts and observations into the mix? Moving on then, and thanks again to Jeanette and Steve Williams. Moving on then to our scrutiny report. Louise, are you going to introduce this for us?
Thank you, Chair. So the scrutiny report is set out on pages 163 to 176. It was delayed. It should have been produced sort of summer last year, but sort of COVID got in the way, I'm afraid. And so we produced a two-yearly report, which I hope accurately reflects the work of this committee. It is best practice to produce a report like this and reflect back on the work that the committees have been doing. The year saw a change in our scrutiny officer from Yasmin Makin to Mark Mills, and I would like to personally thank them both for the work they've done in supporting the committees and all the members on ONS. At this time, with the last meeting of this committee, I'd personally like to sort of say how important I think the ONS committees are, and the work that you do both in scrutiny and in policy development. And I hope the future is equally as productive. And I think I'd like to sort of make a personal thanks to all of your work on the committees, all of the members who sit on the ONS committees in this one as well. So thank you for your work, and hope the future is rosy.
Thank you very much. And I think we should thank the officers back, because we certainly wouldn't get through some of the agendas without them. We're most grateful, and it's been fun most of the time. Wasn't it, Kim? Most of the time. Right, who wants to speak to this? Councillor Else.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you, Louise, for your kind remarks. I can't let that go by, however, without just saying one thing. And that is that it's a pity that the work that we have done and the effort that we have put in to this strategy, to the principle of overview and scrutiny appears not to be appreciated fully by our executive. And that opinion has been put on Facebook on many occasions. And I'd just like to say that I think that is really out of order. Thank you, Chairman.
Yes, certainly very disappointing. Does anybody else want to speak to this? Any items they feel strongly about or pleased about? No? We'll just take it as noted then, shall we? And keep it as a keepsake, I suppose, you know, frame part of it. Which brings us to item 9, and we waited for this a long time. We still have, we've gone nodded off for a minute then. Thank you, Matt Lang. You have, we've been waiting for our biodiversity action plan to come, and I'm delighted you're here to give us an update on this. As I said earlier, I was with the Farnham Biodiversity Action Plan group earlier today, so it's a good day for action plans on biodiversity.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, sorry for the delay in updates on the biodiversity policy. As all aware, it's been a long, difficult few years for the council, which has had its impacts on us as officers. However, I can say a first outline draft of the policy has been drafted and shared with the portfolio holders for environment and parks and countryside. We've also held a first consultation event with towns and parish councils and other interested organisations. I know not every town and parish council could attend that event, but there is a second event being planned for later on in October, where people that didn't attend can come along. We've received feedback from the Surrey County Council, Surrey Wildlife Trust, Natural England, all the key sort of partners, and we'll continue that stakeholder engagement as the policy drafts develop in time. We are still aiming to bring a draft of the policy to the next scrutiny committee in November, in whatever form that committee will be at the time. And then we'll be obviously inviting comment from the committee in regards to the policy then. Ultimately, we'd hope to have the final policy adopted, drafted out with an action plan to be adopted, I guess, by full council in February next year. That would be the aim.
I mean, will this sort of feed into planning? Will this go through as a SPD ultimately, or how will it work?
It's not an SPD, this particular policy. I mean, what originally we were tasked with writing a biodiversity policy that sort of covered the activities and actions of the council services separate to planning. There has been a lot of talk and conversation about, I know there's a great deal of interest in the planning and the biodiversity element, but I think really that would be a separate SPD document, and that would require an extensive consultation period. That's something perhaps the council does need to look at in due course.
Just there's so much going on with you know, the Environment Bill when that eventually becomes into force, and obviously the biodiversity net gain in the MPPF and our own biodiversity policies. You know, there's a lot on biodiversity. I didn't know anything about it as a town councillor. I had no idea you've been to the towns and parishes at all. So, you know, nobody told me.
Well, it was just attended by the clerks, I believe, for this initial one.
But we still haven't had an update, which would have been helpful. But I shall have a little moan.
And part of the work is to try and dovetail all of the biodiversity action plans that have been developed by towns and parishes across the borough of Waverley. So we're all looking at the same thing.
Well, that's what was my worry about the Farnham one, because you know it's been going, I don't know how many years, a couple of years, and it's all. I mean, there's some people you're probably doing the same people. You've obviously got the Surrey Wildlife Trust, but then you've got the people from all sorts of particular species, you know, who've been involved. So it's been done at a really high level of biodiversity, and you know, I'd hate it to go to waste, and I'd hate your work to go to waste. You know, I want it to be used. If we've got a policy, you know, is this just for you to use, or is it for us to use as, you know, I mean, what I'm trying to say is, how does this fit in to the other actions that this borough takes?
Well, I guess we're trying to provide a document that is like exemplar advice and ways of going about, you know, increasing biodiversity and maintaining it in the borough. And it's a document we'd hope would, you know, could be used by any local authority within the borough or group as well to refer to. So that would be the general intention.
We just don't want things to sit on shelves and not do anything, you know. It doesn't. Councillor Reid, and then
I think because I'm on the board of the AONB, and also the Natural England are looking to encompass more land within that area, these sort of reports could easily boost places that need to be included. So it hasn't gone to waste. It's a big scrutiny sort of issue that can be used and used positively in areas that may not otherwise be looked at. So thank you.
because you know more than I, but the Surrey Hills AONB isn't all joined up. It's got bits in the middle which, you know, need joining up so that we can actually, as you say, increase biodiversity by increasing corridors and stepping stones and all these other things that they need. So that's a big piece of work, and Natural England, I'm told, have appointed consultants to start the work to see if we can extend the Surrey Hills AONB. So exciting times. Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, the Climate Change and Sustainability SPD which for which funding was granted by the executive at a meeting where the webcasting and Zoom connections failed, so we weren't able to speak as registered. That went through. There's £30,000 being spent on a consultant to do exactly what Guildford have just done, actually, some months ago, produce a climate change SPD. But ours is called Climate Change and Sustainability. Quite obviously, all other items which would come under sustainability ought to be included in that, so that we can, to answer your question, how does it affect us, particularly in planning decisions and that sort of thing. Surely we should be bringing the biodiversity action plan elements within the sustainability part of the climate change and sustainability SPD, as we should with the biodiversity elements from the Natural England's delivery framework, and also the air quality elements which we should be putting into the local plan part 2 from paragraph 186 of NPPF. Those things should all come into the surely. I mean, shouldn't we suggest to the executive at the very least that all elements of sustainability be looked at and put into the SPD, for the climate change SPD, so that all Matt's work and the work of all the towns and parishes, particularly, who have been building up these biodiversity action plans properly over the years, a very good volunteer, very knowledgeable volunteers. I know some of them from Farnham area, from SARG, the Amphibians and Reptiles group, and from Friends of Farnham Park, of course, and many others in South Farnham. These groups have done a lot of work, and we want to be able to reflect that and give the protections due in our planning decisions. So let's get them into this SPD. Could we perhaps agree that as a committee?
Well, we could certainly put that forward. I mean, one of my issues, if every document does all things to all men, you end up not knowing where you're going, and there was something very comforting about Rushmore's biodiversity action plan, because it was geared towards planning, I mean, it was sort of, it helped you and you understood what it was for. You don't want documents to be so all-encompassing that in the end you haven't a clue which bit you're using for what. But no, I agree, we've got to join it all up, because all these things are joined up in life. We don't have little compartments, do we? Councillor Reid.
I just wanted to say that the Surrey Hills Society had invited all the towns and parish clerks and other people who wanted to come to a Zoom meeting. So that's all taken place, and the presentation was given to and open to all of them. So
no, you missed my part. I mean, I went to that Zoom meeting because we all got the invitation as councillors, but as a town councillor, I didn't know anything about it at all. So what I'm saying is, if the town clerk went to something, he didn't tell us. If he didn't go, we'll get him to go to the next one, because certainly as a town councillor, I had no idea there'd been any contact at all between Waverley and the town council, whereas I went to the Zoom one. It was very good. Does anybody else want to comment on that? I mean, there's all these words now, which we didn't even know or say a couple of years back, that we're all now suddenly incredibly aware of and wanting, to make sure that they are included. But we have to be careful, as I say, that we don't end up with unwieldy documents that really don't do the job. Do you want to come back, Matt? Sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, in tandem with this, we're also writing a tree strategy, an action plan, an all-encompassing tree strategy for the trees that we manage and deal with in Waverley. So I know that wasn't on the agenda, but it's running along the same timelines as the biodiversity policy and action plan. I mean, we had quite a lot of documents relating to tree risk management already, but because of the climate change emergency being declared, we felt, it's time to pull everything together and write these documents that maybe at some point in the future they're somehow combined. They will always reference each other, so they're there to complement each other and work together. So they're not all in isolation.
One thing I've learned from the Surrey Wildlife Trust and other people that I've been listening to is that we shouldn't be planting trees necessarily all over the place, and there's certain areas where they're an absolute disaster and they counteract what you're trying to achieve with your floral planting. So it's a balance between, flowers, hedgerows, trees. The whole thing has to be thought through. It's not quite as simple as just planting a tree for the Jubilee, but it does rhyme nicely.
Well, it's an important point, that, because actually trees and climate isn't just about planting trees, but also managing your tree stock you have effectively to ensure its longevity, and existing tree stock will have massive climate benefits and long-lasting ones.
Yes, because you've sown a lovely wildflower bed and then somebody sticks a tree up and it gets no sun. You've got a nice tree but no wildflowers. So it's a balance. Councillor James.
Well, it's just on that point. I can't find it, but having read the document from beginning to end, somewhere in this document it said in one of the action plans we were going to do was to plant more trees and manage. And I had written down in a place, I think we've got more trees in Waverley, in Surrey, than anywhere else. We got the Surrey. Why do we need to spend money on planting more trees and more money to look after them? We should look after the ones that we've got, and I'm all for TPOs and stopping them, but to start spending money now on planting more trees when other areas should have them, I do not agree with, because the expense of then looking after them, the complaints that come in because their leaves are falling down, and as Councillor Hyman says, we're not going to be able to sweep them up. I think we have enough trees in our borough. Full stop. Thank you.
We could have plastic trees, of course, and then we don't have that problem, Shame on you. Right, does anybody else want to say anything on the biodiversity action plan? I think we're delighted that it's going ahead, and look forward to seeing the first draft whenever we get a chance. And I presume everyone in this room is really keen on increasing the biodiversity in this borough. To me, it's an absolute no-brainer. We've got to do something about it.
To reiterate, it needs to be in planning policy.
So that's why I've talked about the joined up bit at the beginning, because we've got so many layers all on biodiversity, and at some point we've got to tie it all together so that we actually do use the policies to create the net gain that we're trying to create. We're going to be mandated to create a certain amount, and then it would be nice in this borough if we could create more, wouldn't it? That would be our ideal aim. And there was a whole lot on the television today about Little Pond. Did you all see that? Tiny ponds in your garden, no fish, nothing sort of ornamental, just little pond. And within days, you've got a whole sort of network of animals and larvae and all sorts of things. And, this one that was being shown was, smaller than what the sort of section on these desks. It was really just a small pond in a corner of a small garden, frogs there, mayfly larvae. I mean, it was just wonderful. So there are all sorts of things you can do. And I think, it's one of these things that I feel we owe it to our children more than some of the other things we keep being told we owe it to our children. But I do think we owe it to our children to leave them a range of flowers and animals and all sorts of things to enjoy, because I just think it's one of life's pleasure. Anybody else wish to talk on that? In that case, we don't have any press and public, and we can go home. So I will say thank you very much for turning out, and thank you for our meetings. Preferred them in committee room 1. Prefer this to Zoom, but it's been great fun, and we'll see where we go with the new system. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Good night.